Hello. So this is chapter 2 of A Case in Need by Michael Crichton, 1993. When I was in the Army a few years back, I served as an MP in Tokyo, and the experience taught me a lot. MPs were the most unpopular people in the city in those days. During the last phases of the occupation, in our white helmets and uniforms, we represented the final reminders of the tiresome military authority to the Japanese. To the Americans on the Ginza, drunk with sake or whiskey if they could afford it, we represented all that was frustrating or constricting about rigid military life. We were therefore a challenge to anyone who saw us, and more than one of my friends ran into trouble. One was blinded by a knife in the eye. Another was killed. Of course, we were armed. I remember when we were first issued our guns. A hard-nosed captain said to us, "You have your weapons. Now take my advice. Never use your gun. You shoot a rowdy drunk, even in self-defense, you'll find out later that his uncle is a congressman or a general. Keep the gun in sight, but keep it in your holster. Period." In effort, we were ordered to bluff our way through everything. We learned to do it. All cops learn to do it. I remembered this as I faced the surly police sergeant in Charles Street Station. He looked up at me as if he'd enjoy breaking my skull. "Yeah, what is it?" "I'm here to see Dr. Lee," I said. He smiled. "The little chink's uptight, is he? Too bad." "I'm here to see him," I repeated. "Can't." He looked back at his desk and shuffled the papers on it in a busy, irritable dismissal. "Would you care to explain that?" "No," he said. "I wouldn't care to explain that." I took out my pen and notebook. "I'd like your badge number, please." "What are you, a funny guy? Beat it. You can't see 'em." "You're required by law to give your badge number upon request." "That's nice." I looked at his shirt and pretended to write down the number. Then I started for the door. He said casually, "Going somewhere?" "There's a phone booth right outside." "So?" "It's a shame. I'll bet your wife spent hours sewing those stripes on your shoulder. It takes them 10 seconds to get them off. They use a razor blade. Doesn't even damage the uniform." He stood up heavily behind the desk. "What's your business here?" "I've come to see Dr. Lee." He looked at me evenly. He didn't know if I could have him busted, but he knew it could be done. "You his lawyer?" "That's right." "Well, for Christ's sake, you should have said so before." He took a set of keys from his desk drawer. "Come on." He smiled at me, but his eyes were still hostile. I followed him back through the station. He said nothing, but grunted a couple of times. Finally, he said over his shoulder, "You can't blame me for being careful. Murder is murder, you know." "Yes," I said. Art was locked in a nice cell. It was tidy and didn't smell much. Actually, Boston has some of the nicest cells in America. They have to. Lots of famous people have spent time in those cells. Mayors, public officials, people like that. You can't expect a man to run for a decent campaign for re-election if he's in a lousy cell, can you? It just wouldn't look right. Art was sitting on his bed, staring at a cigarette between his fingers. The stone floor was littered with butts and ash. He looked up as we came down the hallway. "John." "You have him for 10 minutes, the sergeant said. I entered the cell. The sergeant locked the door behind me and stood there, leaning against the bars. "Thank you," I said. "You can go now." He gave me a mean look and sauntered off, rattling the keys. When we were alone, I said to Art, "Are you all right?" "I think so." Art is a small, precise man, a fastidious dresser. Originally, he's from San Francisco, from a large family of doctors and lawyers. Apparently, his mother was American. He doesn't look very Chinese. His skin is more than olive and yellow. His eyes look apathetic, folds, and his hair is light brown. He is very nervous, constantly moving his hands in fluttering movements, and the total effect is more Latin than anything else. He was pale now and tense. When he got up to pace the cell, his movements were quick and abrupt. It was good of you to come. In case there is any question, I'm the representative of your lawyer. That's how I got in here. I took out my notebook. Have you called your lawyer? No, not yet. Why not? I don't know. He rubbed his forehead and massaged his eyes with his fingers. I'm not thinking straight. Nothing seems to make sense. Tell me your lawyer's name. He told me, and I wrote it in the notebook. Art had a good lawyer. I guess he'd figure he'd need one sometime. Okay, I said. I'll call him when I leave. Now what's going on? I've been arrested, Art said, for murder. So I gathered. Why did you call me? Because you know about these things. About murder? I don't know anything. You went to law school for a year. I said, that was 10 years ago. I almost flunked out. I don't remember a thing I learned. John, he said, this is a medical problem and a legal problem, both. I need your help. You'd better start from the beginning. John, I didn't do it. I swear I didn't. I never touched that girl. He was pacing faster and faster. I gripped his arm and stopped him. Sit down, I said, and start from the beginning, very slowly. He shook his head and stubbed out his cigarette. Immediately, he lit another, and then said, they picked me up at home this morning about 7, brought me in and started questioning me. At first, they said that it was routine, whatever that means. Then they turned nasty. How many were there? 2, sometimes 3. Did they get rough, slap you around, bright lights? No, nothing like that. Did they say that you could call a lawyer? Yes, but that was later. When they advised me of my constitutional rights, he smiled, that sad, cynical smile of his. At first, you see, it was just for routine questioning, so it never occurred to me to call one. I had done nothing wrong. They talked to me for an hour before they even mentioned the girl. What girl? Karen Randall. You don't mean the Karen? He nodded. J.D. Randall's daughter? Jesus. They began by asking me what I knew about her and whether I had seen her as a patient. Things like that. I said yes, that she had come in to me a week ago for consultation. Chief complaint of amenorrhea. What duration? 4 months. Did you tell them the duration? No, they didn't ask me. Good, I said. They wanted to know other details about her visit. They wanted to know if that was her only problem. They wanted to know how she acted. I wouldn't tell them. I said that the patient had spoken in confidence. So then they switched tacks. They wanted to know where I was last night. I told them I had made evening rounds at the Lincoln and then taken a walk in the park. They asked me if I'd gone back to my office. I said no. They asked me if anyone had seen me in the park that night. I said I couldn't remember anyone, certainly nobody I knew. Art sucked deeply on his cigarette. His hands were trembling. Then they started to hammer at me. Was I sure I hadn't returned to the office? What had I done after making rounds? Was I sure I hadn't seen Karen since last week? I didn't understand the point of the questions. And what was the point? Karen Randall was brought to the MEM emergency ward at 4 this morning by her mother. She was bleeding profusely and sanguinating, actually, and was in a state of hemorrhagic shock when she arrived. I don't know what treatment they gave her, but anyway, she died. The police think I aborted her last night. I frowned. It just didn't make sense. How can they be so sure? They wouldn't say. I kept asking. Maybe the kid was delirious and mentioned my name at the MEM. I don't know. I shook my head. Art. Cops fear false arrest like they fear the plague. If they arrest you and can't make it stick, a lot of people are going to lose their jobs. You're a respected member of a professional community, not some drunken bum with a penny or or a friend in the world. You have recourse to good legal advice, and they know that you'll get it. They wouldn't dare charge you unless they had a strong case. Art waved his hand irritably. Maybe they're just stupid. Of course they're stupid, but not that stupid. Well, he said, I don't know what they've got on me. You must know. I don't, he said, resuming his pacing. I can't even begin to guess. I watched him for a moment, wondering when to ask the question, knowing that I would have to, sooner or later. He noticed I was staring. No, he said. No what? No, I didn't do it, and stop looking at me that way. He sat down again and drummed his fingers on the bunk. Christ, I wish I had a drink. You'd better forget about that, I said. Oh, for Christ's sake. You only drink sociably, I said, and in moderation. Am I on trial for my character and personal habits, or for... You're not on trial at all, I said, and you don't want to be. He snorted. Tell me about Karen's visit, I said. There's nothing much to tell. She came asking for an abortion, but I wouldn't do it because she was 4 months pregnant. I explained to her why I couldn't do it, that she was too far along, and that an abortion would now require abdominal section. And she accepted that? She seemed to. What did you put in her records? Nothing. I didn't open a file on her. I sighed. That could be bad. Why didn't you? Because she wasn't coming to me for treatment. She wasn't becoming my patient. I knew I'd never see her again, so I didn't open a file. How are you going to explain that to the police? Look, he said, if I'd known that she was going to get me arrested, I might have done things differently. I lit a cigarette and leaned back, feeling the cold stone against my neck. I could already see that it was a messy situation, and the small details, innocent in another context, could now assume great weight and importance. Who referred her to you? Karen? I assume Peter. Peter Randall? Yes, he was her personal physician. You didn't ask who referred her? Art was usually careful about that. No, she arrived late in the day, and I was tired. Besides, she came right to the point. She was a very direct young lady. No foolishness about her. When I heard the story, I assumed Peter had sent her to me to explain the situation, since it was obviously too late to arrange an abortion. Why did you assume that? He shrugged. I just did. It wasn't making sense. I was sure he wasn't telling me something. Have other members of the Randolph family referred to you? What do you mean? Just what I said. I don't think it's irrelevant, he said. It might be. I assure you, he said, it's not. I sighed and smoked the cigarette. I knew Art could be stubborn when he wanted to. Okay, I said, then tell me more about the girl. What do you want to know? Had you seen her before? No. Ever met her socially? No. Ever helped any of her friends? No. How can you be sure? Oh, hell, he said. I can't be sure, but I doubt it very much. She was only 18. Okay, I said. Art was probably right. I knew he usually aborted only married women in their late 20s and 30s. He had often said that he didn't want to get involved with the younger ones, though he did on occasion. Older women and married women were much safer, more closed-mouthed and realistic. But I also knew that he had recently been doing more young girls, calling them teeny bopper scrapes, because he said to do only married women was discrimination. He meant that partly as a joke and partly not. How was she? I said. When she came to your office, how would you describe her? She seemed like a nice girl. She's pretty and intelligent and well poised. Very direct, as I said before. She came into my office, sat down, folded her hands on her lap, and reeled it all off. She used medical terms like amenorrhea. I suppose that comes from being in a family of doctors. Was she nervous? Yes, he said. But then they all are. That's why the differential is so hard. The differential diagnosis of amenorrhea, particularly in young girls, must consider nervousness as a strong etiologic possibility. Women often delay or miss their menstrual periods for psychological reasons. But 4 months? Well, not likely. And she'd also had a weight gain. How much? 15 pounds? Not a diagnostic, I said. No, he said, but suggestive. Did you examine her? No, I offered to her. I offered to, but she refused. She had come to me for an abortion, and when I said no, she left. Did she say what her plans were? Yes, Art said. She gave a shrug and said, well, I guess I'll have to tell them and have the kid. So you thought that she would not seek an abortion elsewhere? Exactly. She seemed very intelligent and perceptive, and she seemed to follow my explanation of the situation. That's what I try to do in these cases, explain to a woman why it is impossible for her to have a safe abortion, and why she must reconcile herself to having the child. Obviously, she changed her mind. Obviously. I wonder why. He laughed. Ever meet her parents? No, I said, and then seeing my chance, have you? But Art was quick. He gave me a slow, appreciative grin, a kind of subtle salute, and said, no, never, but I've heard about them. What have you heard? At that moment, the sergeant came back and began clanking the key into the lock. Time's up, he said. 5 more minutes, I said. Time's up, Art said. Have you spoken to Betty? Yes, I said. She's fine. I'll call her when I leave here and tell her you're all right. She's going to be worried, Art said. Judith will stay with her. It'll be okay. Art grinned ruefully. Sorry to cause all this trouble. No trouble. I glanced at the sergeant, standing with the door open, waiting. The police can't hold you. You'll be out by the afternoon. The sergeant spit on the floor. I shook hands with Art. By the way, I said, where's the body now? Perhaps at the MEM, but it's probably gone to the city by now. I'll check, I said. Don't worry about a thing. I stepped out of the cell, and the sergeant locked up behind me. He said nothing as he led me out. But when we reached the lobby, he said, Captain wants to see you. All right. Captain's very interested in having a little talk. Just lead the way, I said. That's the end of chapter 2. Thank you so much for listening. Until the next time, bye.